From folklore and fairies
to monsters and mysteries, it came from the Maritimes.
Hi everyone, welcome to It Came from the Maritimes. We are so excited today. We're going to be visiting one of Nova Scotia's most iconic destinations, Peggy's Cove. This is a popular tourist destination, but also beloved by locals. I think most folks who haven't even been to Nova Scotia would recognize a photo of the Peggy's Cove lighthouse resting on those huge granite boulders. Now, I'm sure many folks wandering around on the rocks while enjoying a view of the lighthouse would be shocked to learn that a spirit haunts those shores. But don't worry, we're not braving the rocky coast of this iconic lighthouse alone. We're joined by a guest, Brian Baker, the founder of the Superstitious Times and the author of the book Eerie Whispers, Exploring Canada's Reluctant Relationship with Its Ghostly Lore. Thank you so much for joining us, Brian.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background with the paranormal?
Yeah, I back in 2018, I launched the Superstitious Times, which was kind of exploring the folklore of Canada. And I've always had an interest in the paranormal, but I kind of suppressed it when I got into journalism. So I was kind of quiet, but I'd always pick up those stories where, you know, they were quirky or they had that paranormal vibe, supernatural vibe to them. So I've been ensconced in the paranormal since I was a teenager, probably before then. And then that kind of culminated into, you know, Eerie Whispers back in 2023. And then everything came to its denouement, I guess, in 2025.
Yeah, I picked up a copy at the Halifax Paranormal Symposium this last fall. And
awesome.
I loved it. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you. I was there too. I didn't know you guys were there as well. Awesome.
Yes. So with the book, what I really enjoyed about it is that, so I guess a little bit of mine and Evan's background just to tie into this. So we're both in scientific careers. So I feel like we're both a little shy about talking about the podcast and stuff when it comes to chatting with coworkers. And I loved that your book dives into how Canadians are reluctant to chat about the paranormal or folklore. So what inspired you to write the book?
I did a lengthy feature on the Superstitious Times about how the challenges of Canadian paranormal investigators when they go into locations, the reluctance of people to kind of share the haunted history of a building. And this was from across the country. So I spoke with Jason Hewlett out in BC, Elliot Van Dusen in Nova Scotia, Michelle DeRoche in Ontario, and Morgan Knudsen in Alberta. And the trend was that, you know, it's like sometimes in a lot of locations, it's like pulling teeth. Or when they do get into a location, I know Morgan Knudsen referenced that they wanted her to basically debunk any hauntings in the location and did not allow her to investigate a well-known haunted spot in the location. I wanted to play with that more and wanted to kind of explore Canada's relationship with ghosts. And, you know, when you compare Canada to the US, there's like a glut of hauntings, pop culture, and they intertwine with true crime and history and, you know, all that stuff. And Canada has that, but it's kept quiet. It's subverted, it's beneath the surface and stuff like that. So I really wanted to explore where we were as a nation when it came to ghosts. I come from a journalism background, entertainment and sports reporting, so I was looking at kind of the pop cultural aspects. So our movie making, our literature, our visual art, and there isn't a lot of ghost stuff there either. I mean, you do get a couple of, you know, references in Alias Grace and Margaret Atwood, Southwestern Ontario Gothic kind of writers like James Rainey channeling a lot of stuff when he was talking about the Black Donnellys. But for the most part, Canada seems to be a vacuum when it comes to the paranormal and ghosts. So I wanted to kind of just dip my toe in the water and kind of say, well, why is this? And I went from coast to coast, spoke with a lot of folks that have, you know, helped shape the paranormal culture in Canada. So John Robert Colombo, Barbara Smith, and also paranormal investigators, ghost walk historians, folklorists. I mean, Dale Jarvis in Newfoundland, of course. That just kind of, it kind of opened my eyes to Canadian history and how we treat it, not just through the Eurocentric lens, but also Indigenous and non-European immigrants to Canada. So the Muslim folklore integrating into Canadian lore, as well as Jewish folklore and stuff like that.
I really did find that so interesting in the book because as Nova Scotians, so much of our folklore is from the Scottish, Irish, English folks who moved here centuries ago. But I really did enjoy reading about in your book and then contemplating just how as more folks from diverse backgrounds move to Canada, it will shape and our folklore will eventually evolve.
Well, that was cool. And, you know, the Jamaican diaspora as well was another, and I wanted to talk to more people. But it was a challenge to kind of reach out to those communities and get someone to kind of open up about it. I had a very close friend who shared a story that I had no idea about. He kind of blew me away, and he just didn't want to, his mom didn't want to sit down with me and chat about it. And it kind of prompted his family to come to Canada from South Korea, because his father had passed away, and his father was very interested in, you know, the old folkloric aspects of South Korea. And after his passing, they picked up Catholicism and moved to Canada. So it was very interesting.
I find how you're talking about that very interesting, because one thing I've noticed is since we've started the podcast, we've almost become a safe space for some people who are into ghosts and different things or believers, and they wouldn't necessarily tell just anyone, but they're happy to know that there's someone out there who's kind of talking about the same things they are. So I imagine even you having, your platform with the Superstitious Times and your book, I imagine that would probably open up more people in the future to talk to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was kind of tired. I wanted to write about this. You know, I did entertainment and sports. It was late in my career. I was not working full-time in media at the time. And I'm like, you know, screw it. I'm gonna do this. I want to write about this stuff. I want to kind of shed a light on it. And it was a gentleman by the name of Matthew James Didier, when I was involved in the TGHRS back in the early aughts, that said, you know, he would kind of lament the fact that media would only come around to him during Halloween. And it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. And then, you know, it's always timely, 24/7 news cycle and things are timely. So I just wanted to kind of dedicate something to the zeitgeist when it comes to the paranormal, of course. So went with the Superstitious Times, kind of balancing the skepticism that I have as a journalist and my passion and interest in it.
Oh, that's awesome. And we appreciate the time you've put in to collecting these stories and doing all the research there, because it is very I went in and I was like, we're going to see some ghost stories, but it's more than that. It really kind of tells you about how people act around ghost stories and how people react to it and interact with them. And that's just so a very unique take that I don't necessarily think I've seen anywhere else.
Awesome. Thanks.
I loved how the book compared and contrasted the folklore across the different regions of Canada. And in the British Columbia chapter, Ian Gibbs, who you interviewed, mentions that coastal regions tend to have more ghost stories. So why do you think that is?
I think, you know, the most superstitious people, it's ironic because I have a phobia of deep water, but a lot of the writers I've focused on write about the water. So, you know, Joseph Conrad and, you know, that kind of Gothic lore in Massachusetts and the whaling and all that stuff. But I think it's because of the superstitions of mariners. And there's always been lore. You know, you have a cat on your boat for good luck. Some of those more questionable, dubious ones where, you know, you have the masthead. You can't have, you know, a woman on the boat back in the day unless she's up in the masthead area and exposing herself to the world. And those kind of lores, it's bizarre stuff. And it's very not copacetic with our times now, but it's that superstition and realization that they're always at risk of dying. And I think it's that coastal lore where you hit the shoals and you go under. I mean, there's a lot of very well-known shipwrecks in Canada. Of course, you know, the one on the Pacific coast where it ran aground and the only surviving animal was a dog, of course. And that's associated with the Caribou Hotel lore in the Yukon.
Yes.
And that's where the parrot came from as well. The owners left the parrot behind. They died in the shipwreck, and the parrot stayed at the Caribou Hotel. And then, of course, the sinking of the ship in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and the 2 actors that died in that shipwreck, and they are said to still haunt the bird in Winnipeg, Manitoba, right? So there's a lot of that kind of intertwining that involves even the interior of the country. And I think coastal aspects, especially in the Maritimes, where you have newcomers coming to the country, landing by ship in places like Halifax, and going further into Montreal, and you have the lore between the Griffintown, of course. All that is kind of just tied to the dangers of, fishing, coming across in the first couple of waves of immigration to Canada. That, I think, in itself, and I guess, sorry to bring this up as well, but water has always been known as a good conduit for supernatural phenomena.
Yes.
There's that as well.
Yeah, I find there's a lot of, I guess in the folklore world at least, there's a lot of talk about shorelines being like liminal spaces where there's more likelihood of encounters with the spiritual and all that good stuff.
Yep.
Yes. Now, everything you just mentioned about how many folks made their way to Nova Scotia via ship ties into the spirit we're going to be discussing today. And this is one of the ghosts that you mentioned in the Atlantic Canada chapter of Eerie Whispers. And it's the Lady in Blue of Peggy's Cove.
One of my favorite stories.
It's a good one.
Yeah, definitely.
I love it because of course, with folklore, there's always so many different variations, but there do seem to be quite a few consistencies. And we'll share a brief telling of the tale, but we'll also talk about a few stories that arose centuries after this legend was born that are related. Are you both ready?
I am.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So we'll start with a brief history of Peggy's Cove. So this cove was likely given its current name because it's located in St. Margaret's Bay. That was given its current name in 1612 by the explorer Samuel de Champlain, who named it after his mother Marguerite. So I did not know that until researching this episode. So there we go. In 1811, 5 families were granted land at the spot, and this small fishing community was born. I'm sure the folks who originally resided there had no idea the tourist hotspot it would become in the centuries to follow. Now, since we're a folklore podcast, we're going to be sharing the more interesting but potentially less factual legend behind how this destination got its name. So locals will tell you that Peggy's Cove was named after a young woman who was the only survivor of a shipwrecked schooner which collided with Halibut Rock, which is the point on which the lighthouse now sits. Some variations of the story say that the survivor's name was Margaret, and locals called her Peggy as a term of endearment. And because she settled into life in the community, folks started calling the area Peggy's Cove because she had such an interesting story of how she got there. Now, in other variations of the tale, Peggy's Cove already had its name, but the young woman of the shipwreck couldn't remember her own name, so folks gave her that name since it's where she landed when they found her. Peggy's story is a bit of a sad one. So she was often seen wearing her favorite frock. It was a cornflower blue dress, and it's what she was wearing when she survived the shipwreck. Now, Peggy had been coming to Nova Scotia from Scotland, hoping for a fresh start. She had 2 children back home, according to some, and she was hoping to get a job to earn enough so she could send back for them to join her. She would sit on the rocks, staring out at the sea, daydreaming of the day her children would be seen coming over the horizon. Now, Peggy was a beauty who caught the eye of many, but a local fisherman named Angus was the one who ultimately charmed her. One day, he saw her sitting on the rocks, looking forlornly out at the water, and he wanted to cheer her up, so he jumped up next to her to do a jig. Now, as we all sadly know, the black rocks at Peggy's Cove are treacherous, and Angus lost his footing and slipped, splitting his skull open. Now, some variations will say that he was a fisherman who was on a sea voyage and never returned, but in folklore, we get to kind of pick and choose which variations we share. The locals found his body later that day, but with no sign of Peggy. They could never find out if she was just so distraught at her beloved's passing that she jumped off the black rocks, or they didn't know if maybe she had slipped and fallen into the ocean when attempting to help him. Ever since that fateful day, there have been sightings of the Blue Lady of Peggy's Cove, a spectral woman in a blue dress. She's seen standing on the rocks. Many who see her say that she appears as if she is about to jump into the sea. Some haven't recognized her as a spirit, so they rush forward to help, but they're shocked when she disappears in the blink of an eye. It seems she's sadly doomed to relive her final moments. Some have been approached by the lady in blue and she tries to talk to them, seemingly wanting help, but no one can make out what she's saying. Now, there's some people who think she stands on the black rocks as a guard, trying to warn people away from the dangers of the unpredictable ocean. But more morbid folks have said that they think she's standing there to try to lure them into the water, to meet their untimely end in the cold, harsh water as she did. So, Evan always makes fun of me for sharing the morbid tale, so another happy one courtesy of yours truly. So, have either of you heard any different variations of the Blue Lady tale or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were so many different versions. Barbara Smith wrote about it, and John Robert Colombo, and picking up on lore and websites and stuff like that when I was going through it, because I did a presentation in Thunder Bay earlier about my 6 favorite, 5 plus a bonus one. And I've always been captivated by the Blue Lady of Peggy's Cove. And I think that's partially because, the story I've heard is that she was on the ship with her 2 kids, or the one I had read, and the ship ran aground and sunk, and she was the lone survivor, and she's seen walking the shores looking for her children in the aftermath. And of course, I've heard the Irish jig one where the dancing and he split his head open, Peggy disappeared. I've heard that version as well and read it. That's what I love, as you guys mentioned, folklore. We get to pick and kind of choose what stories get shared along in that kind of broken telephone kind of aspect. I find that fascinating, but I always ask the question whenever I do a feature on a paranormal location, is there a paper trail? And Peggy's Cove is one of the most popular stories in Canadian lore, much like the Dancing Bride at Banff Springs, but there's no paper trail for these forlorn women, which is one of the most common Victorian-style ghost story, I find. Mostly a woman in white, but the lady in blue has a different kind of vibe and edge to it. So
It absolutely does. And I know what you mean. Here in Nova Scotia, I could list like 5 gray lady ghosts off the top of my head. But when we look, because we always do try to look into, similar to what you said, a paper trail, see if there's any like fact behind the folklore that has contributed to the stories or that it would have evolved from over the years. But we'll talk about a few possible instances of a little bit of fact behind them, but there's nothing concrete.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Evan?
I'm still always thrown off when Peggy is a nickname for Margaret, so I'm still stuck on that.
That's it.
But yeah, most of the stories I've heard have been pretty similar to what's already been said there, kind of a small variations, but never anything really too far from those ones.
Yeah. So one of the recurring themes in Brian's book, Eerie Whispers, is how Canadians seem to be reluctant to come forward and share their experiences with the paranormal. And in my research for this episode, I found 2 instances in which folks have come forward claiming to have insider knowledge of the history of Peggy of the Cove, but they were met with skepticism. So I thought these anecdotes would be interesting to chat about.
Awesome.
Now, the first one I found in Bill Jessom's book, Maritime Mystery. So he was another big name in the folklore world.
Mm-hmm.
So he shares a story of a psychic named Marlena who was visiting Peggy's Cove from Toronto. And she was just there as a tourist. But while there, she reported that she was feeling this overwhelming sensation of loneliness while roaming along the shore. Out of the blue, she was overcome by this strong sensation that the spirit she was interacting with had come from Scotland, and she felt like the spirit was disliked. So I thought this could potentially be true if the locals did blame Peggy for Angus's demise, if that was part of the folktale was true. Now, as Marlena got closer to the high rocks at Peggy's Cove, she saw a woman in a long blue dress who stared at her before disappearing. So what I found interesting is that while she was in the area, she mentioned this occurrence and someone directed her to a local woman named Hattie, who claimed to be the daughter of this Peggy of the Cove. So Hattie claimed that her mother Peggy was a very real person who had moved to Nova Scotia from Scotland, and she had moved there as a war bride who had met a man who was serving in the military overseas. The man she married was, in his home life, a fisherman at Peggy's Cove. According to Hattie, Peggy was unhappy because her in-laws didn't like her because they had hoped her son was going to marry one of the local girls. But Peggy was already there, tried to make the most of it, and she ended up having 5 children. Hattie was the youngest. Now, because Hattie's husband spent long days at sea working as a fisherman, Peggy was stuck spending a lot of time alone with her in-laws who disliked her. So Peggy would go and stand on the rocks looking out at the sea, just dreaming of returning to a friendlier home in Scotland. Now, sadly, her husband died at sea, and without his love, Peggy just couldn't tolerate staying in Nova Scotia, even with her children. So she wrote to her father, who sent her the money so that she could return home. Hattie thinks that the spirit of Peggy's Cove is that of her mother. One, because her mother always loved to wear this beautiful blue dress. It was the nicest item of clothing she owned. But also because when Peggy passed away in Scotland, her relatives wrote to Hattie and her siblings saying that her mother had always regretted abandoning them and hoped that they were well. So Hattie thinks that the spirit returned in the afterlife to look after her descendants at Peggy's Cove. So what do you guys think?
That's pretty cool. No, that's a great story. You mentioned Hattie was met with skepticism.
She was, yes. I think they either thought that, like, they believed her story was true, her experience was true, but thought that Hattie had picked up on details like her mom being from Scotland, things like that. So she absorbed the legend as her own.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's still not a happy story by any means. So I mean, it kept the same tone really, but a different flavor, I guess.
Yeah.
It becomes less of a forlorn kind of female figure that we kind of fall into in Canada, to more of a almost like a sentinel, or almost like a human form of the lighthouse, well, kind of being there as a beacon to look over the community and her descendants.
I really like that interpretation of it. And that's one part of Peggy's story that I was drawn to, is like, I love the idea of her looking out for folks, because I'm not sure if, Brian, you're familiar with this, but at least one unfortunate soul loses their life each year on the Black Rocks because they're very slippery. People don't realize that they're black because they're wet.
Mm-hmm.
So folks will slip in, or a rogue wave has been known to wash over and unfortunately take people with it.
Yeah.
So I do love this idea of Peggy being a sweet spirit who's hoping to protect others from her fate, instead of the more kind of doom and gloom take that some folks have where she's trying to entice them, more like a siren.
The siren, or the that aspect, the Kelpie, I guess, in Irish lore.
Yes.
I mean, like, the Black Rocks already call out to people. They want to be there.
Yeah, it's not worth the Instagram selfie.
No.
Yeah. I know when I was in Halifax, I wanted to actually take a side trek to Peggy's Cove, but it was too long of a trip. I didn't have wheels, and it would have been a very expensive taxi ride. So
yeah, it's always further away than I anticipate. Now, there was another curious development in the story of Peggy that took place in 1996. I found this tale on the Peggy of the Cove Museum website. So a woman named Maxine, who visited Nova Scotia all the way from North Dakota, claimed that she was the great-granddaughter of the famous Peggy of the story, and a local author, Bruce Nunn, interviewed her. So Maxine had said that this story had been passed down in her family through 2 generations, and she said that her great-grandmother Peggy was a young girl traveling from England in the 1800s who was the only survivor of a tragic shipwreck, and there was a family, the Weavers, who found her wandering around, soaking wet and freezing on the cold Black Rocks. This young woman couldn't remember her name due to the shock, so the Weavers named her Peggy because of where she was found. And she lived with them until she ended up marrying one of the sons and then moving to North Dakota. One of the interesting things. So part of the reason they had the local author interview her is because a lot of folks thought this was just a woman who had heard the story and wanted to stake her claim on it, maybe get 5 minutes of fame. But Maxine, when she visited Nova Scotia, brought an essay that she had written in high school in the 1930s about her family history, which included this tale of Peggy. And it did have a lot of very similar notes to the folktale of Peggy that we know, which there's no evidence that it had been formally documented in a book until 1954. It seems unlikely that she would have read this story. Now, a lot of folklore is oral tradition, so she very possibly did hear it. She was another one that a lot of folks were quite skeptical as to the origin of it.
Was that book Helen Creighton's book, 1954?
I couldn't find exactly which one it was, but yeah, it's interesting because, like I said, it's not impossible that a woman whose family was originally from Nova Scotia would have heard this story, but yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's an interesting one, and I mean, it matches up with like one of the ones you already told. But if it was from the 30s, it would be a lot harder to get that information. Just they didn't, not exactly just popping on the internet back then.
Yes.
Exactly. That's it. It kind of reminds me of a story when Evan and I were growing up. We heard the story of Ivy at White Point Beach Resort, a spirit who haunted the old lodge. And we heard that story around a campfire. And when I had to write a ghost story for school, so I was inspired by the story of Ivy. But in hindsight, when I wrote it, I didn't actually remember the story of Ivy. I used the name Ivy and used the plot of The Corpse Bride in my story, like the Tim Burton movie.
Yes.
So that's why part of me, like, not to be skeptical of Maxine, but sometimes these things do evolve over time. But
Sometimes people will slip into this association with the story themselves and kind of live through it. I can't remember what it's called exactly, and forgive me for not knowing. But I know it's that aspect of kind of psychologically being kind of drawn in by the story and placing yourself in the timeline or a descendant of that timeline. So it is fascinating. It's that I won't call it a Mandela effect, because that Mandela effect is remember something inaccurately, but it has that kind of similar kind of aspect where I heard my family talk about this. It's in our family lore, right? So.
And that's the thing, it's so easy to just kind of think something's happened when it hasn't. Like, I know there's a lot of the time where I think I like do something and then I like go about my day and then I associate it with something else and then it gets all mixed up in my mind, and that's just like within the realm of like 24 hours. So I can only imagine over generations that it gets really mixed up.
that's it. So we don't have any concrete proof as to the origin of Peggy's, but I do love that there's a few kind of theory circulating around.
And that is awesome, yeah.
Yes. So Evan and I like to end our episodes with a little quiz or a segment. And today, Brian, you get to help Evan come up with the answers. So this is a Haunted Lighthouses of the Maritimes quiz. So since, of course, we talked about a haunted area with a famous lighthouse today, I thought this was relevant. So one of these we did cover in a past episode, so Evan has no excuses to not get it. And the other two, I'm sure we will in the future. Our first haunted lighthouse is a black and white lighthouse on the west coast of Prince Edward Island. And you can stay in it overnight, and it's rumored to be haunted by the former lighthouse keepers. Any guesses?
Is it West? Yeah, West, not West Point, but West.
Yes, West Point.
West Point, yeah.
You got it.
Glad you knew
so
that
this
one.
It's considered by many to be one of Canada's most haunted places, and it's haunted by the apparition of a bearded man, and there's often flickering lights reported.
Oh,
So Evan, your next summer trip is already planned.
perfect.
Now, this next one is a red and white striped Nova Scotia lighthouse that sits on a Halifax Harbour island, and it's haunted by a famous local ghost called Double Alex.
I know this. I was literally just reading about this and I forget the exact name.
I think I wrote about this one as well. Sambro Island?
Yep,
Lighthouse? Yeah.
Yes.
you got it. So yeah, this is apparently Canada's oldest operating lighthouse. It was built in 1758, and some have even called it the Canadian Statue of Liberty because it welcomes folks to the Halifax Harbour. So the ghost of Double Alex is the spirit of a man who took his own life after he spent the Army's payroll on alcohol and was facing a severe punishment.
Okay.
So yeah, our final one is a white round brick lighthouse, also on Prince Edward Island, and it's the oldest lighthouse in PEI, and it has a red top, and it's rumored to be haunted by the spirit of an Acadian with a hunched back.
I feel like the name is in French, isn't it? Or no, not French.
You went there this summer.
No, I know. I was there. It's really nice. Prim? Point
Yep,
Prim?
Point Prim.
Okay, good. I got one.
I was going to say that's the one we did a maritime mini on, so I was hopeful. This lighthouse is rumored to be haunted by, like I said, a man with a hunched back who was sadly deported from the island but returned in the afterlife in search of his buried treasure. So thank you both for indulging me with that quiz.
No problem.
And Brian, thank you so much. This has been such an interesting conversation, and thank you for joining us for the Blue Lady of Peggy's Cove episode. So is there anything else about the book that you'd like people to know? Like tell everyone where we can find it to get a copy.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when I was in Halifax, I walked around to a couple of bookstores. I went
Nice.
to one down by, there's a record shop that I went into because I'm a music nut. So, but I think it's Bookmark.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's a popular one.
Yeah, I signed a couple of copies there, and then when I went to the mall, I was walking back to the hotel from the Citadel, and I went into those Coles at the mall and signed a book there as well. But you can find them at your local bookstores, of course. You can get them through Dundurn Press, which is they're the Canadian as well. If you can't find it at your local bookstore, you can find it online there and order a copy, and it'll ship out from University of Toronto Press. You can get it at Amazon. I'm very hesitant to go that way, but because of the situation in the world right now. But you can get it there too. You always reach out to me too.
Yes. And so how can folks find you?
Yeah, so you can reach me through superstitioustimes.com, of course. You can read, I've been slowing down a bit because work has been picking up, and I've had a bit of family-related stuff that's kind of consumed a lot of my time lately. But yeah, you can reach me through Instagram, Facebook. There's a page for the Superstitious Times and for myself, Brian Baker. And you can get me on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. This has been very enjoyable, and I was surprised that I actually got two of the questions right. So
I was impressed. You won over Evan, so you're a better maritimer than him. I don't. We're going to lose our status as a maritime folklore podcast. We always do like to end our episodes with a little local folklore superstition. So, Evan, do you have one for us today?
I do. Our folklore tip for this episode is, it is bad luck to paint your boat blue.
I certainly wouldn't do it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.